Do no harm. Those words are commonly associated with the Hippocratic Oath. Doctors must take when they're sworn in, which has been around for centuries. But according to the National Library of Medicine, in the modern version of the oath, there's no promise by the physician to do no harm or to never give a lethal medicine. We live in a generation plagued by many different ethical issues. The process of giving and taking life has become so prevalent that the basis of the Hippocratic Oath has shifted to allow for policies such as euthanasia. And that's what I'd like to look at today. Examining the ethical considerations, how it's morphed into a widespread outlet for suicide, and its violation of God's plan for mankind. Now, I'd like to clarify that I'm not discussing passive euthanasia, which is withholding artificial life support. This is common with do not resuscitate orders. I'd like to directly examine euthanasia, which legal status varies around the globe. It's legal in Canada, a majority of Europe, and 10 states within the US, while it remains illegal in parts of the UK, Asia, and India, and is punishable by death in Islamic countries. Traditionally, euthanasia was allowed for people near their imminent death, such as those in hospice care, until 2021 when laws changed to make those with long-term chronic pain eligible. The criterion for assisted suicide is only becoming broader. According to the National Library of Medicine, by March this year, Canada will allow euthanization to those whose only basis is a neurological discomfort, such as loneliness or depression. Canada reports euthanization of 45,000 people since federal legislation in 2016. But Canada is not the only place this is growing. The Netherlands allow euthanasia to be granted at age 12 with parental consent. Children that can't even legally consent to medical procedures are eligible for assistance in their suicide. The Netherlands report 8,700 approved requests for assisted suicide in 2022 alone. The Dutch government reports 60,000 requests for euthanasia as approved in the last decade. These are big numbers, growing by thousands, and each of them is a human life. It's undeniable that euthanasia harms vulnerable people. Once legalized, it can be exploited and promoted, and is unfairly weaponized towards the poor, the vulnerable, and the disabled. Many Canadians have decided assisted suicide is an ideal option when faced with the cost of living, and a blind eye is being turned to the people taking the brunt of assisted suicide's push. According to a survey by the National Post, a third of Canadians support assisted suicide as a cure for homelessness. 1 in 4 Canadians support assisted suicide on the grounds of poverty. It's counterintuitive to say we value the poor and we want to provide them equal opportunities in life, and in the face of need, offer them death as the ideal option. What was legalized as an exception is being normalized as the standard. No longer are medical issues the source, it's shifted to be more of an economic question. Leaving people to make the choice to die because the state is failing to fulfill their fundamental human rights is unacceptable. Yet we see cases of this happening. Euthanasia is weaponized towards those with disabilities. Rose Finley, a Canadian woman who is a quadriplegic, featured on CBC, shares that she applied for assisted suicide because it was easier to get government support to die than government support to live. She applied for the Disability Support Program, and she was told that it would take 6 to 8 months for her application to be approved. However, she could be medically assisted in her suicide in only 90 days. She states, "Our government is not prioritizing the lives of disabled people, that it's easier to let them go than it is to actually give them the assistance that they need. All lives, disabled or not, are worth upholding. We're in such a rush to offer the choice to die. Why don't we ask how we can sustain life?" According to the Regional Euthanasia Review Committee, Huntington's, Parkinson's, and Alzheimer's are all eligible for assistance in their suicide. In 2021, 12.4% of all assisted suicides were for neurological conditions. People with dementia are being involuntarily euthanized. A malpractice case underway involves a dementia sufferer who asked to be euthanized when the time was right. When her doctor judged this to be the case, the patient resisted. She was drugged and restrained by her family before the doctor administered the fatal injection against her will. The doctor who administered the dose has justified her actions, stating she was fulfilling the patient's last request, and that since the patient was incompetent, Her protests before death were irrelevant. The doctor decided when it was time. We have reached a place where we are allowing forceful euthanization to be justified. And when we allow it to be justified, we are encouraging it to be weaponized towards the poor, the vulnerable, and the disabled, which is a gross violation of human rights. According to Canada's very own criminal code, anyone who counsels someone towards suicide or aids someone in a suicidal act is liable of imprisonment of 14 years or more, whether or not the suicidal act is executed. Yet the government is allowed to fund, facilitate, and encourage suicide on a mass scale. It's undeniable that euthanasia harms vulnerable people. I believe that in a generation where we are fighting to die with dignity, we need to ensure the right to live with dignity. Euthanasia fails to recognize the worth of a human life. Who are we to judge what lives are more or less valuable? Euthanasia, like many other mainstream ethical issues, is being framed in a way that focuses on its extremes and harps on its justices, such as death with dignity and the right to die. We are in an age that demands choices in everything, and euthanasia advocates claim that's what this discussion is about, when really it comes down to the question, does pain or suffering make life less valuable? Society views quality of life as the only factor worth considering. Yet life has value regardless of whether or not we are tired of living it, and it goes deeper than that. The Bible states that all people are made in the image of God, unlike animal or plant life. Job 14:5 says, "A person's days are determined. You have decreed his number of months and have set limits that he cannot exceed." Euthanasia takes God's place as the author and the controller of human life, and potentially circumvents the plan for salvation in an individual's life. If your life is cut short, there are things you will not experience. And if you are not saved yet, that is detrimental. According to a Gallup poll, right to die debate is under legislation in many states, and 73% of U.S. adults think euthanasia should be acceptable. While not yet commonplace in the U.S. the way it is in Europe, it is headed in that direction. We want to play with this while it's distant, but we are blind to what it morphs into. I ask you to oppose assisted suicide, seeing its radical shift in other nations, that we are careening down a slope that we do not know the end. If we see that we've changed the very base of medical ethics or the Hippocratic Oath, I ask you to oppose euthanasia as an act of mercy or equality, but recognize it as a violation of equal care, of God's plan for mankind, and a basic lack of respect for human life. Thank you.